Say it. Say you're worthless black trash, or I'll send you flying down there. She refused, and he pushed. The wheelchair hurtled over the edge of the stairs. Her body tumbled down the cold concrete steps, blood spilling everywhere, her screams drowned out by the bullies' triumphant laughter. They thought it was over. That disabled black girl would never dare lift her head again. But right then, the roar of a Harley thundered like lightning, cutting through everything. A massive biker stepped off his bike, leather vest covered in patches, hand gripping a gun handle, eyes burning with rage. The bullies went pale when they realized the girl they just shoved down the stairs was his own daughter. And just 24 hours later, when the ringleader opened his front door, he found over 20 Harleys parked across the yard, headlights blazing straight into his face. This is the most brutal revenge story I've ever told. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single second of what happens next.
It was the only accessible pathway, a fragile bridge between the main academic building and the lower annex. For 16-year-old Alyssa Reed, this dim corridor was a daily trial. She sat in her motorized wheelchair, her dark skin stark against the cold gray concrete walls, her hands resting lightly on the controller. Alyssa had learned how to move through a world designed for legs she could not use, navigating it with a quiet, solitary resilience that most people mistook for shyness. Today, however, the path was blocked. 3 figures stood beneath the overhang, looming in the shadows like a wall of varsity wool and arrogance. At the center was Ethan Crowley, 17, white, wearing his status like armor. His expensive varsity jacket hung off him with deliberate carelessness, unbuttoned to reveal a stained t-shirt beneath. In his own mind, Ethan was not just another student, he was the crown prince of a decaying town. Flanking him were Logan Pierce and Mason Redmond, 2 hulking linemen who existed only to magnify Ethan's cruelty. They were smoking, and the sharp, acrid scent of illegal tobacco clung heavily to the damp air trapped between the walls. Alyssa stopped her chair about 10 feet away. She checked the time. 5 minutes left to reach her remedial math class. Being late meant another detention, another mark against the clean record she fought desperately to protect. "Excuse me," Alyssa said, her voice steady and practiced. "I need to get through." Ethan did not turn around right away. He took a long, slow drag from his cigarette, holding the smoke in his lungs as if savoring a fine vintage. When he finally exhaled, the thick plume rolled toward the stained ceiling. Only then did he pivot on his heel. His eyes were glassy and cruel, the eyes of someone who believed consequences were meant for other people. "Well, look who it is," Ethan drawled, a smirk curling his lips. "The Rolling Stone." Logan and Mason snickered, the sound bouncing off the concrete like gravel. "I have a class, Ethan," Alyssa said, her grip tightening on the joystick. "Please move." "Please?" Ethan mocked, his voice dripping with condescension. He stepped away from the wall and planted himself squarely in the middle of the narrow ramp, spreading his arms wide as if claiming the space as his personal kingdom. "You seem to forget who you're talking to, Alyssa," he said, his tone dropping into a boastful swagger. "You think this is just a school? This is my territory." "My old man is Richard Crowley," he continued, stepping closer and gesturing with his cigarette like a conductor. "That place isn't just a bar, it's the real city hall. The mayor drinks on my dad's tab every Friday night. The chief of police owes him more in gambling debts than he makes in a year." He puffed out his chest, fueled by the borrowed power of a man who sold cheap beer to broken locals. "So when I stand here," he whispered, leaning in, "it's the same as my dad standing here. I own the concrete you're rolling on. Nothing here is free, especially for people who don't belong." "This is a toll road now," Ethan added, the smell of stale smoke and cheap cologne washing over her. "You want to pass the king, you pay the tax." "I don't have money," Alyssa replied, lifting her chin slightly, "and I don't pay tolls to school bullies playing pretend gangsters." Ethan's smirk vanished, the playfulness drained from his face, replaced with raw entitlement. He glanced at the cigarette in his hand, its tip glowing orange, and with a casual flick, tapped the ash. It didn't fall to the ground. It landed on Alyssa's thigh, smearing gray across her jeans. It was a violation, dirty, disrespectful, aggressive. Alyssa flinched as she brushed the hot ash away, her heart slamming against her ribs. "You missed a spot," Ethan said coldly, watching her struggle. "You're pathetic." Alyssa's voice dropped into a low, controlled register. "You're just a sad little boy blocking a wheelchair ramp." The insult struck home. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he stepped forward until his boots touched the footrests of her chair. He loomed over her, using his height, using his ability to stand, to make her feel small. "Listen to me," he hissed. "You think you're special because the school built you a little road? You think you matter?" He gestured toward her paralyzed legs with absolute disgust. "This ramp is for people, Alyssa, for functioning humans. Not for scrap metal, not for broken things that belong in a junkyard." The words hung in the air, sharp as a blade, stripping away her humanity. But Ethan had made a fatal mistake. He assumed that because Alyssa was sitting down, she was helpless. He assumed she was afraid. Alyssa's hand slid from the joystick and gripped the metal frame of her wheelchair, her knuckles turning white as she prepared to do the one thing Ethan Crowley never expected. Ethan leaned closer, invading her space. "What's wrong, Alyssa?" he sneered. "Finally figured out this school wasn't made for people like you?" Alyssa's voice cut cleanly through the smoke and swagger. "You talk a lot about your dad, like he's some kind of king." Her tone stayed calm, but there was a blade beneath it. "Everybody knows Crawley's Tap is just a dump where he pours cheap booze and watered-down lies for the same drunks every night. He's not a boss. He's a small-time hustler, just like you." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Logan's jaw dropped. Mason's eyes flicked from Alyssa to Ethan, suddenly alert. Ethan's face flushed red, then drained pale, his smirk twisting and collapsing into pure rage. He didn't care about teachers, school rules, or even the dead camera above the door. All that mattered was that someone, especially someone like Alyssa, had dared to strip away his armor in front of his boys. "Say that again," Ethan hissed, jaw clenched, fists trembling. "Say it, I dare you." Alyssa didn't look away. "I said you're nothing without your daddy's bar and your daddy's debts. Take those away and you're just another coward with too much mouth and not enough backbone." Ethan's nostrils flared as he snapped at Logan and Mason. "Block her in, now!" Obediently, Logan lumbered to the top of the ramp, crossing his arms with his eyes fixed on the ground. Mason slid to the bottom, his broad frame sealing the narrow exit. Alyssa was trapped, no way forward, no way back. A fresh wave of tension rippled through the air. The late bell echoed somewhere in the distance, but no one moved. In this forgotten corner, time froze. The normal order of school dissolved, leaving only Ethan's ugly little kingdom. Ethan lowered his face until it was inches from hers. "You like running your mouth, don't you?" he sneered. Alyssa's reply was ice. "No, but truth does." His hand shot out, gripping the armrest of her wheelchair with unnecessary force. The smile on his lips was cruel, practiced. "Let me tell you what's true, Alyssa. People like you, people who don't fit, end up getting rolled over. Maybe if you learned your place, things wouldn't be so hard." Alyssa's knuckles tightened, but she refused to show fear. "My place isn't beneath you." Ethan's laugh was ugly, echoing off the cinder block walls. "Keep talking and maybe I'll teach you some respect." For a moment, there was only the hiss of his breath and Logan's nervous shuffling. Then something shifted. Ethan's mask slipped, revealing the bitterness beneath the bravado. He smirked again, drawing out every word. "Why don't you beg, Alyssa? Beg me for a pass. That's what everyone else does."
Alyssa didn't blink. "I'd rather crawl than bow to you." His patience snapped. Ethan kicked the front wheel of her chair, sending a violent shudder through the frame, a message and a threat. The chair jerked sideways, nearly tipping, but Alyssa righted herself, jaw clenched. "Watch yourself," Ethan barked. "I can make life a lot worse for you. Nobody's gonna care. Not the teachers, not the cops, not even your own." He crouched, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for her. "You know why I get away with it? Because my dad makes the rules in this town. Because people like you don't get a say." Alyssa stared back, seeing not a king, but a boy desperately hiding from his own shadow. She whispered, low and clear, "Your dad's bar can't buy you a backbone." For a split second, uncertainty flickered across Ethan's face, then fury took over. He reached for the strap of her backpack, fingers digging in. "You want to act tough? Let's see what's in here. Maybe you got something worth paying for." Logan and Mason exchanged uneasy glances, Logan shifting his feet as if ready to bolt. Alyssa gripped her chair, heart hammering, refusing to let fear crack her mask. She watched Ethan's hands, knowing that whatever he found would never be enough. Ethan leaned in, his voice crawling with menace. "You know, Alyssa, you're not as special as you think. Around here, trash gets swept aside." As he bent down, his voice thick with threat, Alyssa caught a glimpse of something far more dangerous in his grip, a shadow of what was coming next. His fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack, knuckles bone-white with intent, and Alyssa shot a glance down the hallway. It was empty. She considered yelling for a teacher, but Logan stepped sideways and blocked her view, his broad frame forming a human barricade. Mason positioned himself behind her, silent and tense. The threat in the air was electric, oppressive, so heavy it felt like it was squeezing the breath from her chest. Alyssa braced herself and spoke anyway, her voice cutting through the standoff. "If you touch my stuff, that's stealing. You know that, right?" Ethan's grin sharpened, pitiless. "You gonna call a teacher? Go ahead. Let's see who they believe. A girl with an attitude or the son of this town's finest?" He yanked the backpack from her chair, the contents rattling with every rough jerk. Logan and Mason hovered nearby, no longer meeting her eyes. Whatever sympathy they might have felt was buried under fear and loyalty. No one stepped in. No one said a word. Ethan unzipped the bag and began rifling through it, pulling out notebooks, a half-eaten granola bar, a water bottle, tossing each aside with growing irritation. Then his hand closed around something small and soft. A blue pouch, the kind hospitals hand out. He dangled it by the drawstring, squinting at the faded writing. "Well, well," he said, mock curiosity dripping from his voice. "What do we have here?" He flipped it over, reading the emergency card. "Nitroglycerin. Emergency only. Heart condition." He scoffed. "Didn't know being pathetic was contagious." Heat flared across Alyssa's cheeks, a fresh wave of humiliation, but she refused to let it show. Her voice stayed steady. "Give that back, Ethan. It's my medication." He cut her off with a harsh laugh. "Without it, what? You gonna drop dead? Maybe you should have thought about that before running your mouth." He tossed the pouch toward Mason, who fumbled it before clutching it tight, clearly uneasy. Logan glanced from Alyssa to Ethan, his voice barely a whisper. "Man, come on, that's not cool." Ethan shot him a glare so poisonous the protest died instantly. "Don't go soft, Logan. It's just a joke." Then he dug back into the backpack and pulled out a tarnished chain with a heavy pendant. The skull and crossbones of the Iron Reapers. Ethan sneered. "What's this? Trying to play gangster now?" He dangled the necklace inches from Alyssa's face, then spat on the floor. "Shoulda known you'd carry something this trashy." Alyssa's eyes flashed with a cold warning. "You don't know what you're playing with." Ethan's laughter echoed off the empty corridor. "Oh, is this supposed to scare me? Maybe you think you're some kind of outlaw," he mocked. "Please, the only thing dangerous about you is the pity you make everyone feel." Alyssa locked eyes with him, her voice low and deadly. "I'm telling you, Ethan, let me go or you'll regret it." Her restraint, her refusal to beg, only fueled his anger. "Regret it? Who's gonna make me regret anything? The principal? He works for my dad. The cops? They drink at Crowley's Tap every Friday." He turned to his crew, tossing the chain to Logan. "Look at this. Maybe we should pawn it for lunch money." Then he faced Alyssa again, eyes narrowed, voice thick with spite. "Want your stuff back? Beg for it." Alyssa set her jaw, every muscle in her face carved from resolve. "I don't beg." A dangerous silence pressed in. Ethan's expression twisted with frustration. She was supposed to cry, supposed to plead. She wasn't following the script. He leaned in close, his voice a venomous hiss. "You want your medicine? Then crawl for it. Crawl like the broken thing you are." He waved Mason over and shoved the blue pouch into his hand. "Go on, throw it." Mason hesitated, meeting Alyssa's eyes for half a second. Something flickered there. Guilt, maybe? Fear? But Ethan's presence crushed any thought of rebellion. With a grunt, Mason hurled the pouch down the flight of stairs, the sound echoing hollowly below. Alyssa's breath caught. Every instinct screamed at her to go after it, but her chair stayed frozen, heavy as lead. Ethan smiled, triumphant and cruel. "There you go, hero. If you want to survive, maybe you'll finally learn your place." She stared at him, her silence rising like a wall between them. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Ethan, but he quickly buried it beneath another sneer. "You're not even worth the trouble," Logan muttered. "Let's just go, man." Ethan ignored him and pointed down the stairs. "Go get it, Alyssa, or stay here and see what happens next. Either way, it's not my problem if something goes wrong." Alyssa clenched her fists, knuckles white. Every exit was blocked, every shred of dignity under attack, but her eyes burned with a fire Ethan couldn't put out. He pointed again, this time with unmistakable menace, his voice echoing down the hallway. "The only way out is down." Boxed in by Logan and Mason, Alyssa's chair rolled in a slow, sickening arc as they forced her to the top of the concrete staircase.
The hallway behind them emptied out. No one would see. No one would help. Ethan gripped the back of Alyssa's wheelchair, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched so hard a vein pulsed in his neck. Far below, the blue pouch containing her medication and the chain lay scattered on the concrete, glinting faintly, almost impossible to reach. There was nowhere left to turn. "Welcome to the edge," Ethan sneered, his voice ricocheting off the stairwell walls. "Let's see how brave you really are." Alyssa tried to steady her breathing, but her heart was hammering wildly, stuttering in her chest. Sweat gathered at her temples. She pressed her hands against the wheels, but Ethan's grip locked her in place at the lip of the drop. Mason shifted from foot to foot, his eyes darting toward the door, while Logan stood motionless, a wall of muscle and guilt, refusing to meet her gaze. There wasn't a trace of mercy in Ethan's smirk. "You want your medicine, Alyssa?" he taunted, dangling the promise like bait on a hook. "There's only one way to get it, but first you're gonna say something for me." Alyssa said nothing. Her jaw tightened, teeth clenched, refusing to give him even the slightest hint of fear. Ethan leaned in, his breath hot and sour against her face. "Say it out loud so everyone can hear. I am trash. I am nothing. I don't deserve to be here. Say that, and maybe I'll let you roll down like the good little freak you are." Her stomach twisted as dark spots swam in her vision. Her body recognized the warning signs, the spinning world, the heart pounding against her ribs, screaming for air. She fought for control, forcing herself to focus on Ethan's eyes, to cling to the fire that had kept her alive every single day. Ethan squeezed the chair harder, his knuckles biting into the metal. "What's wrong? Can't you talk? Maybe you really are broken."
Logan glanced at Mason, his voice tight with unease. "Ethan, man, just give her the pills. This isn't funny anymore." Ethan snapped his head toward them. "Shut up. You want to end up like her? Sit down and keep your mouth shut." Mason's face had gone pale, his jaw working as if he wanted to say something, anything, but Ethan's rage spread like poison, filling the space with a suffocating fog that shrank everyone inside it. Alyssa forced a shaky breath. "You're wasting your time. I won't give you what you want." Ethan barked a laugh, sharp as broken glass. "Still got a mouth on you, huh? Still think you're better than us?" She met his stare. "No, I just know what I am, and it isn't what you say." His fury spiked. "You think this is a choice?" He shoved the chair forward, the wheels spinning at the edge, her toes hanging over the void. "Say it. Admit you're trash, or maybe you want to take a shortcut down." Alyssa stared at the staircase, then back at Ethan. A sharp tremor pulsed through her chest, a warning flare of pain, but she willed herself not to show it. Logan tried one last time. "Let's just go, Ethan. You proved your point. She's scared. Leave her alone." But Ethan was beyond reason. He pressed his face close to Alyssa's ear, his voice cold and vicious. "If you don't say it, nobody's ever gonna know what happened. You'll just be another accident. Go on, tell the world what you are." Alyssa stared out towards the sunlight glinting off the parking lot, refusing to break. Her voice was barely a whisper, but there was no surrender in it. "I'm not your victim. You don't get to decide who I am." Ethan's hand shook with rage. "Wrong answer." He released the chair for a split second, then slammed it forward, the front wheels bouncing dangerously against the edge. "Last chance. You want your medicine? Beg, or you can pick it up in pieces at the bottom." Alyssa pressed her lips together, silent and defiant. She had learned long ago that some battles were lost the moment you surrendered your dignity. Even now, balanced on the edge, she would not give him that. Ethan's voice rose unhinged. "Say it. Say you're garbage, and maybe I'll let you live." Her silence was louder than any scream. For a long, suffocating moment, no one moved. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Then Ethan's mask shattered, hatred spilling out raw and ugly. "You want to be stubborn?" His hand shot forward, gripping the chair with violent intent. "I'll help you get down there faster." His words hissed like a lit fuse as his grip tightened. Then he slammed his foot into the back of Alyssa's wheelchair. The metal groaned in brutal protest, and the world dropped away beneath her. The chair shot forward, helpless against gravity, the front wheels lurching over the edge.
For an instant, everything slowed. Alyssa's gasp was swallowed by the sudden rush of air, her hands flying out to brace herself, but there was nothing to grab. The wheelchair flipped, metal shrieking against concrete. Her body was thrown like a rag doll, legs twisted, arms reaching for a world that could not catch her. Her vision shattered into fragments, stairwell, sky, pain, the blur of shoes and faces far above before she slammed into the bottom with a sickening thud. Then there was silence. Far below, near the edge of the parking lot, Hawk had just pulled his Harley to a stop when the small device hanging at his neck began to vibrate, flashing an urgent red. It was the emergency signal tied to the Iron Reaper's medallion he had given to someone who mattered more than his own life. Instinct and an old promise sent him charging toward the school. Even with the engine still ticking hot, he looked up just in time to see a body tumbling down the stairs, the medallion flashing as it tore free. Hawk watched helplessly as blood blossomed at Alyssa's temple, rage and dread colliding in his chest. He hadn't arrived in time to stop the violence, but whoever had done this would not escape his justice. On the landing above, Ethan's bravado collapsed into a twisted grin.
But even that died when Hawk's shout ripped through the air, a sound less human than animal. "Hey!" The roar split the world in two. Logan and Mason froze, faces draining of color. Hawk ran, boots pounding the asphalt, every stride fueled by something close to murder. Students scattered in the distance. Ethan tried to hide his terror behind bluster, but it fooled no one now. Hawk slid to Alyssa's side and dropped to one knee. His hands, gentle despite their size, hovered at her neck, searching for a pulse. "Stay with me, kid," he muttered, the words trembling. Blood streaked down Alyssa's forehead. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused. Her chest hitched in shallow, rapid breaths, a silent fight to keep her heart beating. Far below, the blue pouch lay among the scattered debris at the bottom of the stairs, its contents suspiciously bulky for simple heart medication. Hawk spotted it immediately and scooped it up, frowning at the weight and the faint rattle inside. Years on the street had taught him the field of hidden baggies. He slipped it into his vest pocket without a word, knowing it would be ammunition when the real fight began. Above them, panic spread. Logan stepped back, guilt and fear wrestling across his face. Mason's lips moved in a silent prayer. Ethan stared down, the mask of cruelty beginning to crack, though pride still held him rigid. Hawk fumbled for his phone, fingers clumsy despite his control, his eyes never leaving Alyssa's pale face. "Come on, come on." He hit speed dial, his voice rough as gravel when the call connected. "Cap, get to the school now. Your girl's down. There's blood. Hurry." He kept one hand firm on Alyssa's shoulder, anchoring her to life, his own face a storm of panic and rage. Logan turned as if to bolt, but Hawk's free hand flashed to his belt. The cold glint of metal stopped everyone dead. "Nobody moves," he barked, a command that left no room for argument. The pistol, black and heavy, was both promise and warning. "You stand right there." For the first time, Ethan couldn't speak. The color drained from his face as Hawk fixed him with a stare that promised consequences. The schoolyard seemed to shrink, the light dimming as the rules changed in a single heartbeat. Alyssa barely clung to consciousness, the world spinning wildly. The only thing she heard clearly was Hawk's low whisper, fierce and broken. "Hold on, Alyssa. You hear me? Don't you quit. Help's coming." Students who had watched from corners and windows now pressed their faces to the glass in stunned silence. Some filmed, most simply froze. Fear rippled through the courtyard. Justice, real, raw, and unpredictable, had arrived, and it didn't look anything like the movies. On the stairwell, Ethan's confidence evaporated, the laughter that once followed his cruelty dying in his throat, replaced by a terror he had never known. Hawk kept his gun trained on the boys, his other hand never leaving Alyssa's wrist. His voice softened, cutting through the ringing in her ears. "You're not alone, little one. Not now." The air in the courtyard turned strange, tight, electric, charged with premonition as teachers peered from classroom windows and students crowded the glass.
An entire school seemed to hold its breath. Then, within minutes, came the sound, deep, primal, the roar of engines multiplying, rolling across the blacktop like thunder tearing open the sky. The vibrations shook windows, rattled lockers, and sent a flock of birds shrieking into the air. Metal gates groaned as they were forced aside. Harley after Harley surged through, each bike rumbling with menace, heat, and intent. Every rider wore the patch of the Iron Reapers, the skull and crossed symbols unmistakable. At the front rode a giant. His presence swallowed the chaos and replaced it with dread. Marcus Iron Reed dismounted in one smooth motion, a mountain of a man with skin dark as midnight, a black leather vest stretched across his massive chest, arms thick with muscle and old scars. Mirrored sunglasses hid his eyes, but nothing hid the weight of him. The others fell silent as he moved forward. Iron didn't speak. He didn't need to. Each step was deliberate, unstoppable.
As he walked through the circle of bikes, even the boldest students shrank back. His boots left heavy impressions on the concrete, the silence behind him broken only by the low, idling growl of engines. Hawk rose to meet him, his voice cracking as he pointed toward the base of the stairs. "She's hurt bad. It's Alyssa." Iron didn't blink. He didn't let anyone see the horror that flashed across his face. He dropped to one knee and gathered Alyssa into his arms with a gentleness that made his sighs seem impossible. Her blood soaked into his vest, but he didn't flinch. "Get an ambulance," he growled. Someone fumbled the phone, hands shaking as they dialed. Logan tried to bolt, but a biker stepped in front of him, shoving him back into the tightening circle. Mason looked like he might break down completely. Ethan hovered at the top of the stairs, trapped between fight and flight. Iron rose, Alyssa cradled against his chest. He looked up slowly and deliberately, locking eyes with Ethan. In that instant, every shred of arrogance drained from the boy's body. Behind the mirrored lenses, Iron's gaze was murder contained behind glass. He stepped forward, his voice deep and resonant, like a warning bell. "Down, now." Ethan's legs shook as he stumbled down the steps, his bravado collapsing with every move. Logan and Mason were herded after him, swallowed by a wall of leather and steel. Hawk kept his gun trained on them, but it was the bikers' silence that weighed the heaviest. They didn't shout or threaten. They simply watched, daring the boys to breathe wrong. Iron gently laid Alyssa on a blanket someone had tossed from a saddlebag. He brushed blood from her brow, then turned back toward the boys, his hands curling into fists the size of anvils. "Who did this?" His voice was barely more than a rumble, but it cracked straight through their defenses. Ethan swallowed hard, sweat pouring down his face. It was an accident. She fell." A biker with a long scar down his cheek stepped forward, his voice low and vicious. "Kids like you don't know the first thing about accidents." Hawk moved closer, lowering his gun but not his glare. "I saw everything. You want to lie to us, or you want to beg?" Around them, the crowd of students swelled. Phones were raised, mouths hung open. No one dared intervene. Iron loomed over Ethan and for the first time tore off his sunglasses. His eyes were black, cold, rimmed with fury, and wet with something dangerously close to heartbreak. "You don't touch what's mine. Ever." Ethan wavered. Two bikers seized his shoulders and slammed him to his knees, hard enough to knock the pride clean out of him. Logan and Mason were forth down beside him, the last scraps of their courage already gone. Iron let the silence stretch, each second heavy as judgment. He drew a slow breath, chest rising and falling, then spoke again, his voice steady and final. "You will never forget this day." He didn't raise a hand. He didn't need to. Justice had arrived on steel wheels. Behind him, a biker cracked his knuckles. Another snapped on a pair of gloves, the sound sharp in the air. Ethan tried to stammer an excuse, but a verbal barrage of jeers and threats drove him silent. Logan whimpered as someone forced him to kneel deeper, dragging his pride through the mud. Mason sobbed openly, pinned beneath the weight of men who had survived real wars, not childish games. They weren't beaten senseless. They didn't need to be. Shame, fear, and humiliation were punishment enough, delivered with brutal precision through stares, words, and forced submission. Every jeer, every glare, every command repaid what they had inflicted 100-fold. The bullies had nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, and the circle of chrome and leather never broke. Iron knelt beside Alyssa again, his massive hand covering hers. His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for her. "You're safe now. No one will ever hurt you again." From the doorway, the principal stumbled out, red-faced and breathless, but the moment he saw Iron standing in the sea of bikers, his confidence withered. He didn't look at Ethan. He didn't dare. His eyes locked onto Iron, dread flooding his face. He knew this wasn't just a fight. It was a reckoning, and nothing at that school would ever be the same again.
Alyssa was gone. Her battered body rushed away by paramedics as the scream of sirens faded into the distance. What remained was the raw, exposed wound of what had just happened. A school forced to confront its own darkness, and 3 boys on their knees, trapped inside a ring of leather and steel. The principal hovered near the doorway, eyes darting, hands wringing as if searching for a way out that no longer existed. He edged forward, voice trembling as he tried to reason with the giant at the center of the storm. "Mr. Reed, Iron, please, we can talk. We can settle this. The police." Iron's stare cut him off like a blade. "You should have settled this before my daughter bled on your steps," he said. Each word landed heavy and final. "Now you're going to watch how cowards are handled." Before the principal could speak again, tires screeched outside the gates. A battered pickup truck lurched to a stop, its fender dented, the door kicked open so hard it nearly tore from its hinge. Out stormed Richard Crowley, red-faced and barrel-chested, wearing a grease-stained bar shirt and clutching a baseball bat like a lifeline. The infamous owner of Crowley's Tap charged across the concrete, eyes blazing at the sight of his son on his knees, the schoolyard locked down by outlaws. "Get away from my boy!" Crowley roared, raising the bat, ready to swing at the first patch of leather that moved. Then he saw it. The unmistakable Iron Reaper's insignia stitched across every vest, the line of bikers forming an unbroken wall, and at their center, the massive figure of Marcus Iron Reed. Recognition hit him like a blow. His grip faltered. The bat slipped from his hand and clattered to the ground. Iron didn't move. He didn't need to. "Looking for trouble, Mr. Crowley?" His voice was ice, stripped of threat, filled only with certainty. The only sound left was the low rumble of idling engines and the quick, uneven rhythm of Crowley's breathing. He took in the circle, the battered faces of his son's friends, the blood staining the concrete. Ethan looked up at his father, desperation breaking through his fear. "Dad, help me. Tell them." Crowley's face shifted, twisted by something older than fear, survival. In 2 strides, he was in front of his son, his hand snapping across Ethan's cheek. The slap cracked through the courtyard, sharp and humiliating, silencing everything. "You idiot!" Crowley spat. "Do you know who that is?" He pointed at Iron, his voice shaking. "You just dragged hell down on this family. That's the man who lets me keep my bar." His words spilled out, ugly and raw. "You think you're untouchable? You're nothing. Nothing without the protection I've paid for your whole miserable life." Ethan reeled, the truth crashing over him in waves. The tough guy act, the smear, the borrowed power, it all dissolved, leaving only a boy exposed and alone. Logan and Mason stared in stunned realization. The real world had rules far harsher than anything they learned on a playground. The bikers closed in, sealing every escape. One leaned close to Ethan and whispered, "You're breathing free air because of your daddy's debts." The principal, watching control slip completely away, tried once more. "Let's all calm down. Please, Mr. Reed. Violence?" Iron turned slowly, sunglasses in his hand, his gaze drilling into the man's soul. "Violence is what your silence gave birth to." He nodded once to his crew. "Teach them fear, not pain, humiliation. Let everyone watching understand what happens when power protects cowards." The circle tightened. A biker ripped Logan's varsity jacket over his head and threw it to the ground in contempt. Another forced Mason face down onto the concrete, wiping his tear-streaked face with his own sleeve. Ethan tried to hold on to what was left of his pride, but his voice cracked. "Dad, please, do something." Crowley stood frozen, defeated,
his debts rendering him powerless. "You did this to yourself," Crowley said quietly, his voice thick with regret. "You pushed the wrong girl, the wrong family." Phones rose throughout the courtyard, cameras recording every bruise, every sob, every broken shred of arrogance. For once, no one looked away. Iron stepped forward, towering over Ethan. "You're gonna crawl before you leave here. That's the price." Ethan dropped to his hands, forced down by the jeers of bikers and the crushing disappointment in his father's eyes. He crawled across the courtyard, stripped of every illusion of power. Logan and Mason followed, shamed into silence, every inch earned under the weight of public contempt. The principal watched, pale and helpless, the lesson burning itself into his memory. Power could shield monsters for a time, but sooner or later, something stronger always arrived. Crowley's voice broke the heavy silence, bitter and hollow. "You shoved the boss's daughter down those stairs, you stupid kid. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Ethan whimpered, too shattered to answer.
Suddenly, red and blue lights flooded the courtyard as a patrol cruiser skidded into the lot, its siren cutting off mid-wail. Sheriff Dalton, thick-set with a polished badge and restless eyes, stepped out with one hand hovering near his holster. But the moment he took in the circle of bikers, the wall of leather and steel, and the dead, unblinking stare of Marcus Iron Reed, whatever confidence he'd arrived with drained from his face. "Let's not do anything crazy," the sheriff called out, his voice thin against the weight of the moment. "Everybody calm down. The girl's being taken care of. Let's let the law handle this." Marcus didn't answer right away. His eyes never left the sheriff. "You want the law?" he said finally, his voice low and steady. "Then let's start with the truth." Dalton hesitated, instinctively measuring the numbers, the fury, the resolve. He knew his badge didn't mean much here. Marcus stepped forward and pointed to the shattered remains of Alyssa Reed's wheelchair, twisted and broken near the edge of the circle. "Who did this?" he demanded. The silence was crushing. Ethan Crowley stared at the ground, jaw locked tight. Mason Redmond's eyes flicked everywhere except toward Marcus. Then Logan Pierce broke. Fear hollowed him out completely. His knees shook, a dark stain spreading down his jeans as the crowd noticed, murmurs rippling outward. Logan's voice quavered. "It was Ethan. He made us do it. He said nothing would happen, not with his dad running the town." Ethan snapped his head up, rage and betrayal flashing across his face. "You coward!" A biker struck his shoulder hard, cutting him off. Marcus said nothing, letting the weight of the truth crush down on them. Principal Harris tried to reclaim control, his voice unsteady. "There's no need for this. We should let the sheriff handle it." Marcus turned on him, his tone dark and deliberate. "Why didn't you handle it before? Why did you let this go on? My daughter has been bullied for 2 years. Not once did you report it. Not once did you call us. You let her be hunted." Harris stammered, clinging to excuses about internal handling. Disgust rippled through the bikers. Someone spat, another growled. "Covered it up, you mean?" Marcus pressed on. "Who else knew? Who protected these boys? How many other kids suffered because you were too afraid or too comfortable to do your job?" Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, hand edging closer to his weapon, trying to regain footing. "Let's not turn this into a riot," the sheriff said. "If you've got proof." Marcus raised a hand, silencing him. "We're not asking for your justice. We're asking for truth, here and now. And if you can't give it, we'll take it ourselves." The students watched with wide, frightened eyes. For once, there was no laughter, no whispers. They saw the terror on Ethan's face, the shame hollowing Logan, the empty shell Mason had become. Marcus nodded to Hawk, who pushed the broken wheelchair into the center of the circle. Bent wheels, cracked frame, a silent accusation. Marcus pointed again. "Who did this to my girl?" Logan, trembling and broken, lifted a shaking finger toward Ethan.
He did. Ethan made us. He said his family would protect us. Sheriff Dalton searched Ethan's face for innocence and found nothing. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I just wanted... Marcus cut him off. You wanted power. Now you'll know what it feels like to have none. The sheriff took a step back, seeing the crowd, the rage, the men who had nothing left to lose. We'll investigate, he said. There will be charges. Marcus's reply was iron. See that there are, because if you don't, this town will answer to us. The verdict hung heavy in the air. The era of silence, of boys like Ethan ruling the shadows, was over. Loban collapsed onto the pavement, sobbing. Mason stared at the ground, wishing it would open and swallow him. Ethan looked around for help, for rescue, but found none. Richard Crowley stood frozen, hands shaking at his sides, unable to speak. Principal Harris's lips moved silently, his courage finally spent. At the center of it all, Marcus Iron Reed stood over the wreckage of his daughter's wheelchair, a stark symbol of every injustice endured and every debt that was about to be paid.
The principal's office had never known chaos like this. Leather-jacketed bikers packed every inch of the room, their presence alone making the air feel heavy and tight. Walls that once hosted polite meetings and hollow apologies now echoed with a hush of real fear. The secretary, Mrs. Whitman, who had worked behind that desk for 3 decades, sat stiff and pale, her eyes darting between the towering figures and her visibly trembling boss. Marcus Iron Reed planted himself across from Principal Harris, arms crossed, eyes cold and unblinking. Harris wiped sweat from his brow, trying to summon a dignity that had abandoned him long ago. The office door, once a barrier, now stood wide open, bikers leaning in the doorway to make one thing clear: no secrets were leaving this room. Marcus spoke in a low growl, each word deliberate. He asked Harris why the school's cameras were always broken whenever his daughter was attacked. Harris flinched, mumbling about old equipment and budget issues, about waiting for new funding. Marcus slammed his fist onto the desk, making a coffee mug jump. He told him not to insult his intelligence, that this wasn't about money, but about protection, and demanded to know who Harris was protecting. Silence clamped down on the room, squeezing every lie before it could form. Mrs. Whitman stared at her hands, knuckles white, lips pressed thin. A biker with a skull-patched vest crossed his arms and blocked the door, rumbling that they could sit there all day, but the answers had better come quickly. Harris's composure finally cracked. He stammered that he followed procedure, that all incidents were reported to the vice principal. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper, more dangerous than shouting. And she? Before Harris could scramble for another excuse, Mrs. Whitman stood, her voice shaking as she said there was something they needed to see. She disappeared into the back office, the biker's eyes following her at every step. She returned, carrying a thick file bound with a faded red ribbon, dust puffing into the air as she set it on the desk. She whispered that she should never have stayed quiet, but she had been threatened. All of them had. Marcus's gaze hardened as he asked who had done it. Mrs. Whitman's hands trembled as she untied the ribbon and said the name: Vice Principal Elaine Crawley, Ethan Crawley's aunt. She explained that Elaine Crawley had warned anyone who spoke up or tried to discipline Ethan that they would lose their jobs or worse. Teachers, students, everyone had been afraid. Harris slumped in defeat and admitted it was true. Elaine had handled all disciplinary reports and nothing ever reached the district. Anyone who made noise was silenced, including Alyssa Reed. Marcus flipped through the files, scanning pages filled with redacted names and missing reports. Every record of Ethan Crawley's violence had been erased, crossed out, or never filed at all. A biker snorted in disgust and called it what it was, a cover-up. Mrs. Whitman's eyes filled with tears as she said Alyssa had tried to report Ethan the year before and had been threatened with expulsion the very next day.
She went on, her voice breaking, saying she had begged Vice Principal Crawley to let it go, only to be told to mind her place, that no one would ever believe a girl like Alyssa over her own nephew. Marcus's rage simmered just beneath the surface as he asked how many students had been silenced. Harris shook his head hollow, admitting he had lost count. He mentioned Daniel Brooks from the football team, saying his accident hadn't been an accident at all. Daniel had tried to report Ethan for dealing drugs, and the incident had been buried. A freshman's broken arm the previous spring had met the same fate. Mrs. Whitman slid a thin folder across the desk, Alyssa's file. Barely anything left inside. She said the rest had been erased. Marcus stared at it, his hands shaking, and turned at fury on Harris and told him he had allowed all of this to happen. Harris's voice dropped to a whisper as he confessed that Elaine Crawley had threatened his family. He apologized over and over, broken. Marcus stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. The bikers tensed, ready for violence, but Marcus simply picked up the file and hurled it onto the desk. Pages exploded outward in a blizzard of evidence. He declared that it ended today, his voice striking like a hammer on steel. He told Harris that his school, his legacy, and every layer of protection around him were finished. Mrs. Whitman broke down in tears. A biker growled that the district and the media needed to be called, that everything hidden had to be exposed. Marcus ordered his crew to gather every name and every report, making it clear that if the police wouldn't act, they would. Outside the office, the noise of the crowd grew as word spread. The iron curtain of silence that had protected the powerful for so long was finally collapsing. Harris slumped in his chair, defeated, and asked what would happen to them. Marcus's answer was ice cold. He told him they would answer for every bruise, every threat, and every child they had failed. If not today, then soon, and the whole world would know. Marcus gathered files into a single stack, staring down at Harris with the full weight of justice long denied. Then the scene shifted to the steady hum of machines in the hospital room, soft beeps and a rhythmic rise and fall of oxygen filling the air as afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping the white sheets where Alyssa Reed lay.
Her eyelids fluttered as she came to, pain radiating behind her brow. The taste of copper clung to her tongue, bruises aching deep in her bones. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, only that she was alive. A shadow stood at her bedside, larger than the doorframe, arms folded, posture impossibly straight. Marcus Iron Reed, her father, wore his battered Iron Reaper's vest over a hospital-issued chair. His sunglasses hung from his collar, revealing dark eyes that had witnessed too much violence and too much loss. Beside him, Hawk sat hunched forward, hands clasped, head bowed. Both men looked like they hadn't moved in hours. Alyssa swallowed, wincing at the effort. "Dad?" Marcus's head snapped up, the composure that never cracked, shattered instantly. He took her hand in both of his rough palms, his grip trembling. "You're awake, thank God." Hawk exhaled slowly, shakily. "You scared the hell out of us, kid. Thought we lost you." Alyssa's lip trembled as tears welled, hot and humiliating. "I'm sorry. I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to finish school, not bring trouble." Marcus brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't bring trouble. Trouble found you, and it almost took you from me." She shook her head, fighting sobs. "If they knew about you, about the Iron Reapers, it would have been worse. I thought if I kept my head down, if I never told anyone, maybe they'd leave me alone." Hawk's jaw tightened. "You tried to carry it all by yourself. You shouldn't have to, not in this world." Alyssa wiped her face with the back of her wrist, her eyes searching her father's. "I was afraid of being a burden. People already look at me different. I didn't want them to fear me, too, or think I only survived because of you." Marcus's shoulders sagged. All my life I kept this town in line, protected people, made sure rules were followed even when the law looked the other way. But I couldn't protect the one person who mattered most. Alyssa squeezed his hand. You didn't fail me. The system did. Hawk let out a bitter laugh. The system was built to look away. That's why it needs tearing down. A heavy, honest silence settled, broken only by the warmth of her small hand held inside larger, palest ones. Alyssa drew a shaky breath. Dad, there's something you need to hear. She reached into her pocket. Her phone had miraculously survived the fall, tucked safely away from the backpack Ethan had rifled through, and pulled out her cracked phone. With trembling fingers, she unlocked it and pressed play. The room filled with voices, Ethan Crowley's sneering taunts, the threats, the laughter, the demand that she crawl, the theft of her medication, the final chilling command to say she was trash or die. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, the words sounded even more monstrous, impossible to excuse or deny. Marcus's face darkened. You recorded them? Alyssa nodded, pride and sadness tangled together. I wanted proof, in case no one believed me. They never do, Dad. Hawk clenched his fists. They'll believe now. This buries them. Her eyes shone with tears, but her voice was steady. I wanted you to know the truth, not just what happened, but why I stayed quiet. I thought if I pretended it didn't hurt, it would stop. If I just survived one more day, maybe tomorrow would be different. Marcus pulled her close, careful of her bandages. You survived because you're the strongest person I know. I should have been there sooner. I thought protecting the town meant keeping you safe, too. She shook her head gently. You did your best. But they weren't just trying to spare me. They wanted to break me. They wanted me dead. The words hung in the air, terrible and final. Marcus's voice rumbled like distant thunder. Not anymore. I promise you, Alyssa, no one will ever touch you again. Not while I'm breathing. Hawk rested his hand on Marcus's shoulder. It's time, Cap. We take this to the cops, the school board, the press if we have to. Alyssa nodded. Don't let them cover it up. Not for me, not for anyone else. Marcus stood, every inch a road captain, and now, more than ever, a father. They've hidden in the shadows long enough. Tonight the silence ends. He kissed Alyssa's forehead, his voice breaking with fierce love. I'm proud of you. I always have been. She let the tears fall freely, shame finally gone. In her father's arms, fear loosened its grip. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she knew she wouldn't have to face it alone.
The courtyard, still encircled by the low rumble of Iron Reaper's motorcycles, felt like the eye of a storm. Word of what had happened to Alyssa Reed spread through the school like wildfire. Classes were forgotten, lessons abandoned. Students clustered behind yellow police tape in tight knots, phones raised, eyes wide with fear and anticipation. Faculty members hovered uselessly at the edges, uncertain whether to intervene or simply watch the world they thought they controlled fall apart. Ethan Crowley stood at the center of it all, shoulders hunched, trying to make himself smaller. Beside him, Logan Pierce sobbed openly, while Mason Redmond stared at his sneakers, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Principal Harris attempted to reclaim authority, but his voice barely rose above a whisper. He knew it was over. No one would protect him now. Sheriff Dalton paced in front of the crowd, glancing nervously at Marcus Iron Reed and the wall of bikers behind him. He tried to sound firm, but his voice shook. "We will conduct a full investigation," he announced. "Until then, everyone needs to remain calm. No one is above the law." Ethan seized the moment, his voice pitching high with desperation. "She fell. I swear I never touched her. She lost control of the wheelchair. Everyone knows she can barely use it."
A ripple moved through the crowd as students whispered, exchanging uneasy glances. Ethan pushed harder, louder now. "Ask anyone! I tried to help her. She rolled too fast. No one pushed her. I'd never hurt anybody." A voice cut through the noise from the back. "That's a lie." Heads turned as a man stepped forward, leaning heavily on a pair of crutches. Daniel Brooks emerged from the crowd. His gait was slow and deliberate, but his eyes burned with purpose. Once he had been a star quarterback, straight-A student, the golden boy of Crestwood High, until an accident shattered his leg and left him with a truth no one wanted to hear. Daniel advanced step by step, each movement a reminder of what had been taken from him. Students parted in silence. Ethan's face drained of color. "Daniel, what are you doing?" Daniel stopped, standing tall despite the weight on his body. He glanced at the sheriff, then at Marcus and the bikers. "I've got something to say, and you're all going to listen." Principal Harris tried to interrupt. "Daniel, please, let's handle this inside." Daniel shook his head. "No more secrets. Not today." He turned to the crowd. "You all remember homecoming 2 years ago, the night our season ended? They called it a freak accident, said I tripped, lost my balance, broke my own leg. That's what they told the school, the papers, the district." He lifted his pant leg, revealing a thick scar running from knee to ankle, angry and permanent. "But that's not what happened. Ethan tackled me from behind, late, dirty." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "He kept asking me to bring him pills, Adderall, painkillers, whatever he wanted. I refused, told him I wasn't going to destroy my future for his side business. That night, he made sure I'd never play again." Shock spread through the students. Some looked horrified. Others looked down in shame, remembering how often they had laughed with Ethan or looked away. Ethan sputtered. That's not true. Your own aunt said it was an accident. She signed the report." Daniel's glare was ice. "My aunt or yours?" He turned to Sheriff Dalton, his voice steady, but his hands trembled. "Your investigation won't mean anything if you don't ask the right people. Start with Vice Principal Elaine Crawley. She's Ethan's aunt. She covered for him. She threatened me, told me if I spoke up, I'd lose every college offer I had. She's been cleaning up his messes for years. And Alyssa, she's not the first. She's the 10th. A chill swept the courtyard. "The 10th?" the sheriff asked. Daniel scanned the crowd. "Ask them. Freshmen, sophomores, how many of you were shoved, blackmailed, beaten, or bullied, and then told to stay quiet? How many of you watched your reports disappear?" A young girl near the front nodded. "He took my phone, said I'd be expelled if I told." A junior spoke next, voice shaking. "He made me do my homework. When I said no, my locker got trashed. I went to Vice Principal Crawley. She said I imagined it." The stories poured out, one after another, a dam finally breaking. Fear transformed into anger and shame. Whispers grew louder, no longer about what Ethan might do, but about what he had already done. The student body, once fractured by fear, found unity. Logan tried to slip away, but a biker blocked him. "Stay. You need to hear this too." Ethan shook his head wildly. "They're lying. All of them. They're just jealous." No one listened. Even Mason, lips trembling, muttered, "I saw him push Daniel. We all did. But nobody wanted trouble with Vice Principal Crawley." Sheriff Dalton's jaw tightened as he signaled his deputy to begin taking statements. Principal Harris collapsed onto the steps, burying his face in his hands. Daniel stepped closer to Ethan. "You thought you could do anything because your family always bailed you out, because no one ever stopped you. But today, that ends." Ethan lashed out, childish and desperate. "You're just a cripple, Daniel. You're nothing." Daniel didn't flinch. "I may walk with crutches, but I stand taller than you ever did, and so does Alyssa." Applause rippled through the crowd, hesitant at first, then swelling louder. Some students cried, others clapped in relief, or anger, or long-held release. Ethan tried to retreat, but the faces around him were no longer admiring. They were filled with scorn. "You're finished," Daniel said quietly. "You can't hurt us anymore." One by one, the students turned their backs on Ethan. The Prince of Crestwood was dethroned, left alone in the center of the circle. Marcus met Daniel's eyes and nodded with respect, then turned to the sheriff. "Now do your job." Sheriff Dalton sighed heavily. "Ethan Crawley, you are under investigation for assault, battery, and any additional charges that follow. You will be escorted to the station. Any resistance will make this worse." Ethan collapsed to his knees, hollow-eyed, his voice a broken whisper. "Dad!" Richard Crawley couldn't meet his son's gaze. "You did this to yourself." Deputies led Ethan away as the students parted. For the first time, the shadow hanging over the school began to lift. The echoes of Daniel's truth still vibrated through the courtyard when the school doors swung open and Marcus Iron Reed returned, the crowd parting instinctively before his unstoppable presence.
Still wearing his biker vest, boots dusted with hospital grit, Marcus Iron Reed walked with the authority of a man who had watched his daughter bleed and sworn it would never happen again. The students, emboldened by Daniel Brooks's testimony and their own sudden courage, fell quiet as Marcus strode into their midst. In his hand, held like a relic, was Alyssa Reed's phone, the tiny speaker that carried every hateful word Ethan Crowley had ever spat. The bikers formed a silent perimeter, sealing off escape and protecting a new order. Sheriff Dalton watched but didn't move. Even Principal Harris shrank into the background, reduced to a spectator in a reckoning he could no longer control. Ethan stood alone at the center, posture defiant, eyes trembling. His face was pale, lips chewed raw, sweat sliding down his neck. All his charm and smirking bravado had vanished. What remained was the hollow echo of every lie he had told. Marcus faced him, voice deep and steady, stripped of vengeance and heavy with judgment. "Do you know what this is?" He raised the phone, thumb hovering over the screen. "It's the truth. Not just for Alyssa," Marcus continued, "but for every kid you threatened, every life you twisted just to feel bigger." Ethan's jaw tightened, his words swallowed by the vast hush. Marcus pressed play. The courtyard filled with the recording, Ethan's taunts, the fear in Alyssa's voice, the threats and laughter. Proof, undeniable and cruel. Students, teachers, and bikers listened without looking away. There was no more denial, no comfort left in silence. Logan Pierce and Mason Redmond lowered their heads further with every second. Richard Crowley hovered at the edge, clutching his phone as if waiting for a call that would never come. Marcus stepped closer. He didn't shout or raise his fist. He reached out, seized the front of Ethan's varsity jacket, the symbol of borrowed power and protected lies, and tore it from his shoulders in one violent motion. The fabric ripped. Marcus dropped it at Ethan's feet. "Those colors don't belong to you," he said, voice cold as winter steel. "They never did." Stripped of his last armor, Ethan shivered in the open. Tears welled, fought back, and lost. The bikers turned toward Richard Crowley, who recoiled beneath their stares. Marcus's words fell like a sentence. "Your bar is finished. From today on, any man who walks through that door is an enemy of the Iron Reapers. You'll never pour another drink in this town." Richard collapsed to his knees, hands clasped, tears streaming. "Please, I've got nothing left. My son, he didn't mean." Marcus didn't pause. "You paid silence with blood. You looked away and called it business. That business ends now."
Richard pressed his forehead to the pavement, broken. The bikers watched with grim satisfaction. This was justice he understood, the kind that stripped pride, money, favors, and every ounce of borrowed respect. The students watched, some afraid, others relieved. A senior whispered, "It's over. He can't hurt anyone now." But Marcus wasn't finished. He turned to the crowd, his voice measured and deadly calm. Justice doesn't always come from courts. Sometimes it comes from the people you thought were too weak to fight back. Remember that. The world is watching now. Ethan sobbed and dropped to his knees beside the ruined jacket, clawing at it as if it could save him. Marcus looked down, eyes empty of pity. You earned every second of this. Power built on pain is always borrowed, and one day the bill comes due. A hush spread. The bikers stepped back, opening a narrow path. Marcus gestured to Sheriff Dalton, who finally stepped forward, cuffs gleaming. For a long, shattering moment, old Justice and New stood side by side in the open air. As the sheriff led Ethan away, the crowd parted without applause, leaving only a heavy silence. Logan Pierce and Mason Redmond followed with hands behind their backs, heads low, shadows of who they once pretended to be. Richard Crowley crawled toward the curb, sobbing, trying once more to meet Marcus's eyes. Marcus had already turned away, finished with men who traded their souls for comfort. A reporter surged forward, camera flashing. "Mr. Reed, is this the end of violence at Crestwood High?" Marcus paused, glancing at the school, the shattered wheelchair by the steps, and the faces pressed to the glass.
The bitter weight of the day lingered in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Marcus Iron Reed stood at the center of the emptying courtyard, a monument of restrained fury and resolve, while teachers hurried frightened students away. But as the crowd thinned, trouble crept back through the school's front gates, this time wearing a badge and a sneer. Deputy Cole Mercer, the youngest on the force and notorious for his cocky grin, swaggered onto the scene. His gun stayed holstered, but his hand never strayed far from it. The bikers bristled at his presence, sensing the shift in pressure, a predator circling not for justice, but for spectacle. Mercer had long been whispered about in town, ambitious, always hanging around Crowley's tap after hours, turning a blind eye to Ethan's dealings in exchange for a cut of the drug money flowing through the school. He saw the Reapers as a threat to his easy side hustle, and now, with the chaos unfolding, he aimed to shut it down. Ethan Crowley spotted him and seized the moment, his voice rising with desperate hope. "Deputy, they're the ones! They assaulted us, threatened my dad, broke the law! Arrest them! That's Marcus Reed, the biker leader!" Mercer puffed out his chest and played his part, turning toward Marcus with a booming voice. "This is over. Disperse, all of you." He jabbed a finger at Marcus. "You are under arrest for inciting a riot and endangering minors. Hands behind your head. Now!" The bikers tensed. Knives flashed, fists clenched, boots scraped the pavement. Hawk shifted forward, placing himself between Marcus and the muzzle of Mercer's service pistol. For a heartbeat, the schoolyard balanced on the edge of catastrophe. Raw, ugly justice stripped bare. Marcus did not flinch. "You want to play hero for this coward?" Marcus said evenly, nodding toward Ethan, who shrank under the weight of every stare. "Go ahead, but you'd better understand who you're protecting." Mercer's eyes narrowed, his authority bruised by Marcus's calm. "You don't get to make threats, old man. You're the criminal here." Logan Pierce, shaking, tried to melt into the background, whatever loyalty he had left already fractured. As Mercer pressed cold metal cuffs toward Marcus's wrist, a new sound tore through the tension. Sirens, layered and relentless, followed by the unmistakable deep horn of state troopers.
4 black and white cruisers screeched to a halt at the gates. Doors flew open. Officers in crisp uniforms poured out, weapons raised, voices sharp and controlled. The courtyard went silent. The lead trooper, gray-haired and steel-eyed, pointed straight at Mercer. "Deputy Mercer, hands where we can see them. You are under investigation. Drop your weapon." Mercer stared, stunned. "Are you insane? I'm doing my job." "Your job ends now," the trooper snapped, advancing. "Logan Pierce, step forward." Logan's head jerked up. The bikers parted, and he stumbled through, tears streaking his face, unable to look at anyone, least of all Ethan. The trooper's voice cut through him. "We know everything. Drug trafficking, intimidation, assault. Logan, this is your chance." The dam broke. Logan shook violently as the truth spilled out. "It wasn't just Ethan. Deputy Mercer. He took a cut. He framed people who talked, planted evidence, threatened us if we didn't move product through the school. He said the sheriff looked the other way as long as the money stayed local. Please, I've got texts, names. I'll give you everything." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Ethan's face twisted with rage and betrayal. "Liar! You little rat!" But the troopers were already moving. 2 officers seized Mercer as he cursed and struggled, then collapsed into sobs as the cuffs snapped shut. 2 more grabbed Ethan by the arms. His arrogance evaporated as his feet dragged across the pavement. "You need me! You're nothing without me! I'll ruin every one of you!" A trooper held up the blue emergency pouch. Hawk had recovered it from the bottom of the stairs minutes after the fall and slid it into an evidence bag. Inside, tucked behind the legitimate nitroglycerin vials, were several small packets of crystal meth. "You planned to use Alyssa's medical pouch to move product, didn't you, deputy?" the trooper demanded. Ethan's eyes widened as the last of his bravado drained away. Logan continued, voice trembling. "Daniel Brooks tried to tell the truth. Ethan got the deputy to frame him for theft. Alyssa, she was just the next one who stood up. The rest of us did whatever he wanted. We thought no one would believe us. We thought we'd end up like Daniel." Marcus watched in silence as the final layers of lies peeled away. The bikers stood taller. For the first time, real law stood with them. Principal Harris, pale and sweating, tried weakly to protest. "I didn't know. I swear." The trooper didn't even look at him. "You'll answer to the board." Students gathered at the edges, watching as their old nightmares were dragged, kicking and shouting, into the open. Ethan's screams echoed across the blacktop. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. My family, my lawyer." No one answered. The law closed its grip, not only on the guilty, but on the rust that had protected them. As the cruisers pulled away, carrying Ethan, Mercer, and the school's buried secrets toward justice, the courtyard finally exhaled. There was no applause, only relief and the quiet certainty that the story had finally changed. 24 hours after the arrests, Ethan opened his door to find the Reapers waiting, headlights blinding him as justice came full circle. A week later, the school no longer felt haunted. The tension that once clung to the hallways like fog had lifted, driven away not by time, but by justice finally taking hold. It felt as if a storm had torn the roof off the old institution and left nothing but truth behind. Whispers still followed footsteps, but they no longer carried malice. Students looked each other in the eye now. They lingered at lockers, laughed in groups, no longer checking over their shoulders for shadows. The era of Ethan Crowley and his whispered threats was over. On Main Street, Crowley's top stood dark and abandoned, its neon sign forever unlit. Word spread quickly after the arrests. Bankruptcy followed, and the man who once boasted of running the town vanished without farewell, a ghost no one missed. Vice Principal Elaine Crowley was let out in handcuffs the very next morning. Her mugshot filled screens across the region, headlines naming a school official tied to a drug cover-up. She never returned. Teachers who had bent to her pressure scrambled to rewrite their roles in the story, but no one was fooled. The board installed a new principal, Principal Naomi Carter, a middle-aged black woman with a no-nonsense stride and a voice that rang through the halls like a bell, wasted no time. Meetings were called, policies rewritten, accountability demanded. More than anything, her presence was a quiet promise that the days of secrecy and cruelty were over. Change reached beyond leadership. The physical scars of violence were addressed. Construction crews arrived, jackhammers tearing out the battered ramps. New, broad, gently sloped pathways replaced them, built not just to code, but to dignity. Painters erased graffiti, and students volunteered to plant flowers near the cafeteria entrance, a quiet tribute to those who had suffered in silence. When Alyssa Reed returned, it was on a bright Monday morning. The ambulance ride and hospital lights had faded into memory, but the ache in her ribs made every push of her wheelchair a reminder. The school would never forget what had happened, but Alyssa refused to let pain define her. She carried her scars with quiet pride. As she rolled through the front doors, the usual murmur faded. Heads turned, not with pity or curiosity, but with something deeper, a hush reserved for someone who had faced darkness and survived. Alyssa kept her back straight and her chin lifted. She met every gaze. One by one, students parted for her, not out of fear, but respect. Some nodded. Others offered shy, grateful smiles. A freshman boy who once flinched at her presence now raised a tentative high five. Alyssa returned it, warmth blooming in her chest. For the first time, she felt she truly belonged, not as a warning, but as herself. Principal Naomi Carter met her near the office, paperwork tucked under one arm. "Good to see you, Alyssa," she said, her smile free of judgment, full of encouragement. "If you need anything, anything at all, my door is open. This is your school, too." Alyssa nodded, the words landing deeper than anyone could know. She moved down the hallway. The murals seemed brighter. The air felt lighter. The silence of complicity had been broken. Lunch was different now. The old tables, where power once clustered, were mixed together, new friendships forming from shared drama and hope. Daniel Brooks, moving with practiced strength on his crutches, waved her over and saved her a seat. His smile was genuine, free of pity. "Glad you're back. This place feels different with you in it." "It feels different for everyone," Alyssa replied. Scanning the room, she spotted other students who had spoken up, who had finally been heard. There was no going back. Outside, under the afternoon sun, workers finished the last of the new ramps. Alyssa watched as a group of students, some disabled, some not, tested them together, laughing, racing. It was a small victory, but it meant everything. Still, something inside her remained restless. Justice had come, but responsibility followed close behind. She saw it in the faces of students who had never spoken, in the eyes of teachers who had looked away for too long. There was more work to do. Her story had begun in pain, but it would not end in silence. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the bleachers, Alyssa rolled along the newly smoothed path by the football field. The shadows stretched long, but she wasn't afraid. Tomorrow, she would speak with Principal Carter about forming a student committee, one dedicated to giving a voice to anyone who felt invisible, to ensuring no one would ever suffer alone again. The old order had been broken, the school cleansed, but true healing, Alyssa knew, required courage every day. One last promise lingered in her mind, a task only she could complete before this chapter truly closed. A week after the world had turned upside down at Crestwood High, Alyssa found herself rolling into a place she had never imagined she would enter, the County Juvenile Detention Center.
The security guard at the front barely glanced at her ID before waving her through, but Alyssa Reed could feel the eyes following her. She had endured harsher stares and survived deeper silences. The waiting room hummed with uneasy conversation, the squeak of rubber soles on tile, the clatter of vending machines. Every face was tight, every movement cautious, as if the walls themselves might be listening. Alyssa waited with her hands folded in her lap, replaying everything that had brought her here. The fight for justice was mostly finished, but something inside her refused to settle, not until she faced the boy who had tried to break her and so many others. At last, a guard called her name and led her down a stark, echoing corridor. The sound of her wheelchair on polished floor felt unnaturally loud, each turn announcing her presence. A heavy door buzzed open at the end, and she was guided into a small, windowless room divided by thick glass. On the other side sat Ethan Crowley, dressed in orange, thinner than she remembered. His hair was cropped close, his skin pale. He sat hunched with his hands folded, eyes skittering anywhere but toward her. There was no arrogance left, no borrowed power, only a fragile uncertainty. The guard withdrew, the door hissing shut behind him. Alyssa drew a steady breath and spoke first, her voice calm and cold. "Do you know why I'm here?" Ethan hesitated, then shrugged. "You came to see what it's like, to see me pay." She shook her head. "I came because I needed to look you in the eye. I needed to know if you understand what you did, not just to me, but to everyone, to Daniel Brooks, to Logan Pierce, to all the others." His gaze finally met hers. There was no fight in it, only a hollow ache. "You could have let your dad finish it," he said. "Everyone thinks you wanted to. They think you want revenge." Alyssa pressed her lips together. "I did want revenge, for a long time. I dreamed about it. But it wouldn't have fixed anything, not for me, not for the school, not even for you." Ethan blinked, his shoulders sagging as the last of his bravado drained away. "Why didn't you let him?" She leaned forward, her words steady as steel. "Because I don't want my father going to jail over trash like you. I don't want him losing himself to anger the way you lost yourself to hate. You want to know what real punishment is? You wake up every day remembering what you did, and you watch the world move on without you." He swallowed hard. "I never thought it would end like this. Everyone always covered for me, my dad and my aunt." She nodded. "That's the problem with being protected from consequences. You don't learn until it's too late." His voice cracked. "I don't know who I am without the jacket, the team, the power." Alyssa didn't look away. "Then you get to find out who you are when there's nothing left to hide behind. That's your chance and your curse." Silence stretched between them. Ethan stared at the floor, then back up. "I'm sorry," he said, the words shaky, neither fully sincere nor empty. Alyssa nodded slowly. "Maybe one day you will be, but it's not my job to forgive you. That's something you'll have to earn from everyone you hurt, not just me." He searched her face. "What do you want from me now?" She considered it. "I want you to survive this. I want you to see me succeed. I want you to see the people you tried to break, every single one, stand taller than you ever did. That's the best revenge, not your pain, but our joy." Ethan let that settle, then gave a tired, sad laugh. "You're stronger than I ever was." Alyssa gathered her bag and prepared to leave. As the guard returned, Ethan called after her, his voice hoarse. "Will you ever forget?" She paused in the doorway without turning back. "No, and I won't let anyone else forget either." He bowed his head, defeated. Alyssa pushed forward, her movements smooth and unhurried. She had come for closure, and she found it not through rage or vengeance, but by refusing to let his hatred define her. As the doors clanged shut behind her and she rolled into the bright afternoon, she felt lighter. The world was still flawed and capable of cruelty, but it was also a place where survivors could claim their own ending.
The last gold of the afternoon flickered in the side mirror as the convoy rumbled out of town. The wind was gentle, the sky a vast cathedral of fading blue, washed in orange by the sinking sun. To the east, Crestwood's old water tower shrank into the distance, barely visible between the fields and forests spilling toward the highway. With every mile, the past, the secrets, the pain, the cruelty grew smaller, left behind in the wake of roaring engines. Alyssa Reed sat secured safely in the sidecar, her legs tucked beneath a soft blanket, her new wheelchair folded neatly behind her. For the first time in months, she wasn't bracing for impact. She let the rush of wind fill her lungs and the vibration of the road run through her spine. Every jolt and bump reminded her she was alive, not just surviving, not just enduring, but fully alive. Riding beside her was Marcus Iron Reed, his hands steady on the wide handlebars of his Harley, the biker vest riding high between his shoulders. He was both legend and flesh, a man forged by scars and miles. To Alyssa, he was her father, her protector, her flawed hero, something larger than blood and yet deeply human. Around them, the bikers thundered in a loose pack, chrome flashing in the evening light. Some wore smiles, others rode in silence, but every one of them cast glances toward the sidecar, toward the girl who had endured what none of them could stomach. As the highway opened wide, Marcus eased back, and the pack shifted into two lines, forming a corridor of steel and leather around Alyssa. He pulled closer, his voice rising over the wind. "You good, kid?" Alyssa turned toward him, her hair wild from the ride, cheeks flushed, eyes clear in a way they hadn't been for ages. "Better than I've ever been, Dad. You?" He grinned, rare and unguarded. "Not bad for an old man. You handled yourself back there." Alyssa's smile softened. "I had to. Someone had to stand up." Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "People think power comes from being loud, being big, throwing your weight around. But real power is getting back up when nobody wants you to. That's what you did." They rode on in companionable silence, the hum of engines and the song of wind filling the space between them. The world felt vast and uncaged. Alyssa watched the fields blur past, tree lines glowing gold in the dying light. Each mile marked the distance between the girl she had been, quiet, guarded, always bracing, and the girl she had become. She thought of Daniel Brooks, still limping but walking taller now, of Logan Pierce, starting over, of Principal Naomi Carter, standing watchful in the halls, of the freshman who had waved shyly when Alyssa passed. She thought, too, of Ethan Crowley, lost and alone, paying for his choices in the only way left to him. Justice had come, but not all wounds healed the same way. Alyssa drew a slow breath. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd given up?" Marcus's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening on the grips. "Sometimes, but you didn't. That's what matters." She studied him, old questions surfacing. "Why didn't you ever tell me how hard it was for you growing up, black, poor, and different? I only ever heard pieces." He let out a low chuckle. "Some stories aren't easy to tell. My father was a sharecropper's son. Your grandma cleaned houses for people who never knew her name. I learned early that nobody was coming to save me. You learn to fight or you learn to hide. I wanted you to have something better." Alyssa nodded. "You gave me strength, even when I was angry, even when I thought I had to handle everything alone." Marcus glanced at her, his expression serious. "I'm sorry if you ever felt alone. That's the one thing I tried to protect you from. But nobody makes it alone. Not me, not you, not anyone." The silence that followed was heavy but honest, filled with pain, pride, anger, and hope. "Dad," Alyssa said softly, "do you think it'll really change, or will it all go back to how it was?" Marcus considered the road ahead. "It doesn't go back, maybe not for everyone, maybe not right away, but once the truth is out, you can't shove it back into the dark. You showed them what courage looks like. They'll remember that. You showed them what a voice sounds like, even when it shakes. Alyssa's eyes burned at the edges of her tears. I wanted to fix everything. You did more than most people do in a lifetime. You didn't fix everything, but you changed the rules. You gave the next kid a chance. Sometimes that's enough. The convoy rode on as the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the road. A few bikers whooped, celebrating something unspoken. Alyssa closed her eyes, feeling the shared strength of the pack around her. She wasn't alone, not now, not ever again. As twilight deepened, they stopped at an overlook, the valley below flooded with purples, golds, and endless blue. Marcus killed the engine, and the silence was complete. He helped Alyssa from the sidecar, careful and patient, and together they stood at the edge of the world. Father and daughter, two survivors. Alyssa leaned against his shoulder. "Are you proud of me?" He squeezed her hand, his voice low and certain. "More than you'll ever know." They watched the last of the sun slip below the trees, a world washed clean by the storm. Alyssa looked out at the winding road ahead and understood that the fight would never truly end. Not for her, not for anyone who refused to let hate win. But she also knew she was ready. Later, as the bikes roared back to life and the pack rode on together, Alyssa settled into the sidecar, Marcus at the helm. She let the wind carry away her fear and doubt, feeling her father's grit, her own fierce hope rising in her chest. People say justice is blind, but sometimes justice rides a Harley and wears a leather vest. Never underestimate the powerless. You never know who stands behind them or what happens when the world finally listens. As the convoy faded into dusk, it became a living promise that no darkness is too thick to be chased down by light. Somewhere far behind them, in a town that had finally found its voice, the echoes of Alyssa's courage lingered, a beginning for anyone brave enough to stand. Sometimes the smallest voices create the biggest waves. Alyssa's journey was never just about surviving cruelty. It was about forcing a community to look in the mirror and demanding change, choosing dignity over revenge, and finding true power not by standing alone, but by inspiring others to rise beside her.
It sharpened her, refined her, until all that remained was courage and a clear sense of purpose. Alyssa Reed's life after Crestwood High was not easy. Her body carried the echoes of old injuries, aches that flared on rainy days, and quieter scars that lived in the corners of her mind. But the world had underestimated her resilience. Instead of retreating into bitterness or hiding behind invisibility, she chose to move forward. The experience, brutal as it had been, gave her a vision of who she could become. At college, Alyssa Reed became a name spoken with respect. She rolled her wheelchair through the wide, sunlit halls of one of the state's top universities, her presence as confident as any athlete or scholar. Professors quickly noticed the force of her intellect, her sharp questions, her refusal to accept easy answers. She excelled academically, majoring in psychology and sociology, driven by a need to understand why people hurt one another, how cruelty takes root, and how it can be stopped. But her impact reached far beyond the classroom. Alyssa founded a campus organization called Rise Above, dedicated to supporting victims of bullying, discrimination, and violence. The group began small, just a handful of students, many quiet and guarded, some marked by visible injuries, others carrying wounds no one could see. Alyssa created a space where silence was never demanded and pain could be shared without judgment or pity. Her reputation grew as someone who listened deeply, who spoke with calm conviction, and who never mistook pity for solidarity.
She sought out those on the margins, transfer students, freshmen lost in crowded cafeterias, young people who walked with their eyes down. One by one, they joined, finding strength in each other and inspiration in Alyssa's refusal to let her story end in tragedy. She organized workshops on bystander intervention, invited speakers who had survived the unimaginable, and helped draft stronger anti-bullying policies at the university level. Alyssa even returned to Crestwood High as a guest speaker. Her presence transformed the auditorium. The halls that once echoed with cruelty now filled with quiet hope as she told her story, not for sympathy, but to show what could be overcome. Through it all, Alyssa remained grateful, not for the pain itself, but for what it taught her about herself and about others. She never forgot the terror at the top of the stairs, the humiliation, the cold certainty of being erased. Nor did she forget the hand that pulled her back from the edge, her father's tears and pride, the bikers whose presence forced a community to confront its own silence, the classmates who finally found their voices. She carried gratitude for the anger that burned away her fear, for the compassion learned in recovery rooms, for the small kindnesses that arrived when she needed them most. Alyssa made a point of thanking every mentor, every friend, every stranger who helped her along the way. Each one was a stepping stone toward the woman she was becoming. Gratitude became her compass. Instead of allowing bitterness to guide her path, she let it shape her into an advocate, a mentor, and a protector. She volunteered at local high schools, leading peer support groups, and worked with disability rights organizations to ensure schools were truly accessible, not just by law, but in culture and spirit. Alyssa's empathy drew her to her. Students confided in her about bullying, loneliness, and abuse, whether at home or on campus. She was never too busy to listen and never too proud to admit she still faced dark days of her own. Her vulnerability became her strength. Her honesty made her trustworthy. Each year, Alyssa marked the anniversary of that brutal day, not as a victim, but as a survivor. She wrote letters to her younger self, honoring how far she had come and promising to keep going. She even sent a letter of forgiveness to Ethan Crowley at the juvenile facility where he served his sentence, not to excuse what he had done, but to free herself from the last weight on her heart. Through it all, she never forgot what her father, Marcus Iron Reed, once told her on the open road. You can't put the truth back in the bottle once it's out. Courage is contagious, and every time you stand up, you make it easier for the next kid. Alyssa lived by those words, carrying them into classrooms, board meetings, and late-night phone calls from students in distress. She believed in justice, but even more, she believed in redemption for herself and for those willing to change. Years later, she would look back and see not just a broken body at the bottom of a staircase, but a young woman who learned to rise, to fight, and to love fiercely. Her scars were real, but so was her hope. In helping others, Alyssa found her purpose. She became a beacon for anyone still searching for the courage to speak, to heal, and to move forward, no matter what the world tried to take from them.